important webinar tonight. Appreciate the message, Robert. So as you will discover this evening, you're able to send Josh and I messages, cannot message each other. There's also a Q&A function, and we'll use the chat and the Q&A function differently. So one's more for sort of interaction and the other one more for feedback. But we'll probably not start until at least 6:35, give people a chance to join. And in the meantime, sit tight, stay warm. Hopefully you've been able to get some food into you, because we plan on being here and so at least 7:30 and up to 8 p.m. to answer your questions. We're still allowing a couple more minutes for people to join, and then we will get things started more formally. Sitting tight for a minute or so more. Thanks for your patience. Okay, Josh, if you could start the recording.
Yep.
Okay.
It's all started.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to tonight's webinar hosted by GambleAware. So myself and Josh will be co-presenting. I'm an old boy of St. Patrick's myself, class of 2013. So I'm glad to be coming back in a small way tonight. Now in a different area of my life, and I'm talking about gambling harm, specifically gambling amongst youth. And then Josh will be doing more of the content tonight on the links between gambling and gaming as a growing trend amongst the boys, your children. So I'm just going to share my screen to a slide deck. And just we're going to use it tonight. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, we at GambleAware acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people present in tonight's webinar. Just to continue the introductions, so throughout tonight, we want your input. So please utilize the chat function and also the Q&A function. If we are wanting your interaction, please use the chat. So if I'm kind of asking you a question, just use the chat to provide your thoughts. If you have a question yourself or comment yourself, please use the Q&A. That way we can monitor it throughout the recording and tackle things as we go along. Also, we will make the recording available in time for those who weren't able to attend tonight, or if you do have to leave early. Okay. Right. Am I off share screen, Joshua?
No, you're still sharing.
Still sharing? Okay. Oh, but is I on slideshow or am I on normal view?
The slideshow is
okay.
displaying. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay. So we're going to be speaking for about half an hour, and then we got up to 30 minutes later for questions. And these are the topics we're going to discuss tonight. So how young people engage with gambling, the convergence between gaming and gambling, the impact on advertising on young people and their attitudes towards gambling, the impact that you as parents have on your own boys, and also how you can support your boys both in developing a healthier relationship with gambling, or if someone's already experiencing harm, how to send them towards the appropriate help. Okay. Thanks for that, Josh. So these are our learning objectives. So hopefully by the end of tonight, you got a better understanding of how youth are affected by gambling, know your role in not only inadvertently exposing youth to gambling and developing maybe some unhelpful attitudes, but then also how to reverse that, develop a healthier relationship with gambling and set them up for the future, especially once they hit adulthood. So firstly, please use the chat function right now and just put in the chat function your answer to any of these three questions. So how popular is gambling amongst adolescents, in your opinion? Now, you might be a parent, you might be a teacher, you might be connected to school in another way in your own experience. Alternatively, what you already think video and online games have to do with gambling. And thirdly, if you want to comment on what you think influences young people's attitude towards gambling. So just please use the chat function, send a message out to myself and Josh, and I'm just curious to see what you guys think. All these questions will be answered or addressed in some way tonight. Yeah, I would agree with that, Simon, that, yeah, it's mainly sports. And it's something maybe a growing trend. Thank you very much, Megan. It's very insightful. Certainly there are ways that they're designed to try and make them engaging and enticing to youth, and I guess to start to kind of blur the lines. Certainly. Any other comments? You're welcome to add them to chat. Rachel, appreciate your input. Yes, social media is certainly a big influence in the attitudes that youth have towards gambling, especially sports and race betting. And Josh will certainly look at how it all gets muddle up together.
And what the algorithm produces in social media as well.
Yeah,
If they get started on something, it's going to keep on coming.
Yes. Yeah, you get flooded. The feed gets
Mm.
flooded, and it really just reinforces.
Mm.
Yeah, I also agree, Megan, that the exposure through your boys' social world, family, friends, and also the media that they engage with, it really starts to form these attitudes that can be unhelpful. Sometimes they're just blatantly wrong, but they're seeding that for later on. And Robert, you would expect that 40% of students will be involved in some way. We will look at some real world statistics later on. But, you know, if I even think back to when I was at St. Pat's over a decade ago now, before sort of online sports and race betting, online gambling in general blew up, it certainly was present in the cohort. It was something that was already starting to be normalized. So thank you for that input. Let's start to dive into all these questions. So the next set of slides comes from the New South Wales Youth Gambling Study 2020. And it was commissioned by the Office of Responsible Gambling and conducted by Central Queensland University. Before we go into what we're seeing among youth gambling and how that impacts to your boys, let's first kind of get a consensus of what is gambling. So the definition we have on the screen is generally gambling is defined as activity that involves staking money or something of value on the outcome of an event that is decided in full or in part by chance with the intent of winning a prize of money or something else of value. And this definition captures all the activities that are considered as gambling by Liquor and Gaming New South Wales, and particularly amongst boys, your children, betting on sports and races. And the key elements is there's a risk of money, belongings, something of value. To be gambling in the definition that's considered in legislation, there has to be something of value that has been staked. There also needs to be a randomly determined outcome, or at least an outcome that's determined well beyond the control of the person that is staking. And finally, which is integral to every bet that everyone ever makes, and we especially Josh and I would see this in a clinical context, the purpose is to win. The bet is put there with this intention, anticipation of winning. But what Josh will speak to more later is as new forms of gambling emerge, especially as it converges with gaming, pretty much anything can be considered value in the eyes of the person, in the eyes of youth, in the eyes of your boys. So it could be a physical collectible, like a trading card, or now it's starting to turn towards intangible collectibles, like skins and whatnot. So gambling is starting to be blurred, and unfortunately, legislation hasn't caught up. And what's the difference between gambling and simulated gambling? So in simulated gambling, there is a mimicking of these characteristics of traditional gambling. However, there might not be or never is the opportunity to actually stake, win, or lose real world money. So what's happening is people engaging in gambling that has all the features, but yet sort of another risk. And so it's really starting to skew their perceptions of it. They're unregulated, they're accessed anywhere, they're imitating. And I think as Megan said earlier in the chat, they're designed in the way to simulate the real world and really sort of have the enticing, engaging, entertaining, fun elements, all masking the unfairness and the inevitable losing underneath. Whereas gambling in the traditional sense, it's regulated, it's supposed to be accessed only through a licensed mead, and it's those more familiar activities that you think of, like poker machines, lotteries, scratch cards, etc. So let's start looking into this data. And the data, as I said, came from New South Wales Youth Gambling Study 2020. It was conducted in 2 stages. So the first stage was September 2019, and involved interviews with 16 groups of 104 participants held in 8 locations. So they're really trying to get a diverse sample size. And then stage 2 was conducted in the first few months of 2020, so just before the pandemic hit us. So good that we got some data that was away from such a upheaval in society, and it involved a sample size of 2,200 young people online. And these were the questions they were looking at. So how prevalent is gambling? How prevalent is simulated gambling? Influencing factors and that convergence. So how common is youth gambling? What did they find? So just give yourself a moment just to kind of sink into these statistics. And while they might not be true a few years later, 100% accurate, they do speak to a broader picture and a message that's important to reflect on. So just under a third of youth in the study had gambled in the traditional sense, with real risking of real world money. And just over 40% had played games with gambling components. So all those features, but not the risking or the real world money. And this just highlights immediately that this is something that's worth thinking about, worth having a conversation about with your boys or with your students or with just the broader youth population at large. Unfortunately, it might be a matter of when, not if, your boy, your student, comes across gambling or engaged with gambling. And so we want to be on the front foot and starting to have conversations that give them a fuller, informed picture. Some other things that these statistics don't say, but was also found by the study, is that the most popular gambling activities was private betting. So often betting amongst peers or betting on your traditional sports and race betting. And that the most popular simulated gambling games were wheel spinning, poker machines, and casinos. So for all intents and purposes, blackjack, roulette, baccarat. Now, before I go ahead to the next slide, again, I ask you to put your input in the chat function. What do you think the average age was that young people said was when they first gambled? So across the 2,200 people and the focus group, if you were average out when the age that people said they first gambled in that traditional sense, so with real world money, what do you think it was? If you just put that in the chat, it'd be good to kind of see what you'll think.
16, 14, 11.6. That's very specific, Jaden. 13, 14.
13.
Or that 13 to 16 range.
Yeah. So it seems like most people are thinking you're young adolescents. Anyone else would like to provide their guess? Okay. What was it? 11.6 years old. So it's a bit of startling. That's before high school. That's before teenage. That seems really young. And it's, from our perspective, not necessarily unusual, given that we're seeing people presenting to treatment sometimes in their very early 20s or mid to late 20s and talking about gambling before the teenage. And I agree, Megan, it does hit. But it also kind of speaks to the importance of starting this conversation with boys, with students, the St. Patrick's College community as a whole. And yeah, it's, as you said, year 6 and year 7 students, they're being exposed. And we'll talk about those source of exposures later, Robert. But if I actually dive into it a bit more, so the specific starting ages for different gambling activities were between 10 and 12 years on average, for scratchies, lotteries, keno, and poker. It was 5 to 9 years for race betting. That was a range, 5 to 9 years for race betting. Now, you might be wondering, how's that coming about? I don't know. My tip, pun intended, would be the Melbourne Cup, right? That, once a year, there's this normalization of race betting, and even very young people are being asked to participate in sweeps and tips and what their guess is. And they might be using part of their pocket money to actually bet. And so they are starting a lot younger. And then all the forms of gambling, so your poker machines, your casino table games, that was between 13 and 15 years. So it is young, and it's hence the importance of starting the conversation. Now, you might be thinking, there's a disconnect here between the average age of starting and when it's actually legal. Now, to be pragmatic, like with drugs, with alcohol, with vapes, which I know is a big difficulty amongst our youth, is there's plenty of underage access, right? Young people, they readily get around the restrictions. Your boys, your students get around it. And age is not a barrier for private gambling, and especially simulated gambling. It's not a barrier to engage with all those elements of gambling, but perhaps without the risking of the real world money, because they're playing a game that's considered appropriate or age appropriate. And so we'll talk later in the webinar about how you can have positive interactions to prevent unhelpful beliefs, harmful beliefs, and dysfunctional actions starting, given that the exposure and sometimes the interaction is starting at a young age. And finally, we'll actually ask the sample in the study, where are they getting their money from? And surprisingly, the money was coming from, third of the time, parents themselves. So the most common was their own money, right? Which makes sense. Pocket, just your standard allowance, then from a present, then earned from a job. But just under a third were reporting that their parents were giving them money with the open permission to gamble. And hence why later on today, Josh is going to speak to the importance of how your attitudes and actions and behaviors around gambling can really help your boys create much more healthier interactions and understandings. And it might be useful to reflect on how you actually provide your finances to your children, encouraging needs that can be tracked, like shared bank accounts or even like debit cards that are only allowed to use for certain transactions, as opposed to just general cash, which can be deposited into the accounts of friends, older siblings, older people in their peer network. So I'm going now to hand over to Joshua, who's going to talk about gaming and gambling convergence. Thanks for your interaction so far. And if you have any questions about anything that I've spoken about so far, feedback, general comments, please put that in the Q&A function so we can address that at the end. But now over to you, Josh.
Okay. Jump over a slide maybe again so we can get into it. Yeah, so I suppose as many of you are aware, as the years go by, there's an increasing convergence with gaming and gambling, but it's not necessarily so simple and linear, which is something that we'll get into. And I guess the main way that we can group their convergence is to think about gambling-like features and themes showing up in games. So in other words, how gambling is represented in the real world is embodied within the world of whatever game that you're playing, or it's a certain feature of it, like it's critical to the actual game per se. When items that are earned in-game or can be purchased in-game, can be gambled outside of games. For example, skins betting, which is what we'll get into. And of course, how gambling advertising, can pop up in games, which is usually more of a freemium thing. meaning that the game doesn't cost anything to download or install, but there are microtransactions embedded within to sort of fund the game for the developers and in turn entice the consumers or the players to buy them. So we'll go to the next slide. So we really love this. This is a really good breakdown of the full continuum. So where does gaming start and where does gambling end? So if we look up the top left there, so games with gambling-like features. So these are traditional games, video games, right? But they have things that sort of look like gambling within the real world, but it technically doesn't constitute as gambling or simulated gambling. So using an example like Candy Crush, right, and all the copycats out there that you can install, essentially games where you've got a bunch of, jewels and icons and you're trying to match them up and pair them to create combinations of points, right? So if we think about it, like it does look a little bit like a pokey, like a poker machine, like in terms of all these like symbols and reels on the screen and then moving and we're seeing combinations line up to each other. So it evokes that sense of poker machine, but it's not in any explicit or direct way. And then down the bottom left, so a non-gambling game, so Sudoku. So again, it's just a game that you can play, has nothing to do with gambling at all. Or you could say solitaire might be another example of that. So social gambling games. So this is very similar to practice games. It's that social gambling games can be online. So what they both are is that they're essentially simulations of real world gambling, right? So instead of sitting down at a table to play poker, you launch a website or you launch an app. So for example, like, Poker Legends tournament would fall into a social gambling game, for instance. So with practice, that's just purely a simulation. So an example of that would be like would be Tabletop Simulator, which is a game on Steam, which is a platform for accessing games on PC. So that's just where you're running simulations of games, right? Just to sort of or to roll through it or to tweak with it. And with social gambling games, you can sort of play those games but online with other people. So that's how it's working there. And then down the bottom, more towards the middle. So games with embedded gambling. So that's where this usually features in like open world games. So what that means is where you're playing a certain avatar and you're exploring the world in a very open and non-linear way. So similar to sort of exploring out there in the world, but except in a video game. So it's different from a shooter or something like that. So that's, for example, as they say down there, slot machines turn up in Borderlands 2, right? For fun and also to get certain items from it. In Grand Theft Auto 5, they put in the Diamond Resort Casino, which is literally a casino that you can go along to visit and play certain games within it, which is interesting. So again, like, those forms of gambling that we have in the real world are represented in the video game world, right? So it sort of normalizes, I guess, the abundance of gambling within a world. And then we've got, just straight gambling games, right? Or just sort of like pretend or sort of soft pokies, I like to call them. So that's like, Cash Slots Mania and Panda Slots and, all the other games you can download on your phone where it does look exactly like a pokey, except there's no real world money that's required, right? So you can buy extra credits if you run out of spins, but you don't have to spend any money like you would with a land-based pokey or an online casino pokey. And then, of course, as we all know, straight out commercial gambling, right? So an example of that is, placing bets on sports. So next slide, please. Yeah. So leading on from from my last point, actually. So all the games we can download, usually on the App Store or the Google Play Store, right? That sort of like emulate or simulate, certain games that you can play out there or certain, pokies. So we put up there Double Down Casino as a result. We just got in the chat there, keeping games away such as Candy Crush. That honestly depends. We're getting into the realm of, I guess, what game interacts in what way with a specific child. It sort of it looks like it has gambling like features in it, but technically it's not gambling. So it looks a little bit like a pokey, but it doesn't mean that it necessarily is. And to be honest, a lot of people would not connect the dots. That games like Candy Crush are actually drawing inspiration from poker machines out there. So I would say it's not necessarily harmful. It's just a link or a category that we can draw there. For instance.
If I can just
So
add
just to
on,
reiterate with gambling.
oh,
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, I'm just going to add on. I mean, it is a legitimate question, Irene. Given that it can be so indirect or in the subtext, I would kind of see it the same way as should we not keep our children away from ginger beer because it has the word beer in it. It's more that sense of there's not necessarily ginger beer as alcohol. It's just got that word associated with it, and it can start a conversation. We might then use that prompt as well to kind of say, hey, there's all these indirect gambling features. Maybe it's worthwhile to explore it more.
Yeah, so it's starting I mean, that's very important to sort of embed conversations if there is gambling like features in any game, because if it's buried or suppressed, that's probably going to conjure curiosity later on, or them seeking it out through alternative means, with no opportunity for more of an adult discussion around it to sort of reduce risk of potentially having a problem with gambling. So next slide. Yeah. So gambling games with inbuilt gambling. So this is more in the open world space, like I was talking about before. So this is where we can play games that you would find in the real world within the game. So to the right there, that's a screenshot from Red Dead Redemption 1. Sorry, from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, actually. And Rockstar is the producer that makes that game, and they also make a game called Red Dead Redemption. There's two of those, where you can play poker within GTA games and in Red Dead Redemption games as well, for example. So it is mainly within that open world space that you can sort of access these sort of games. RuneScape, like old school RuneScape, is another example where they do have very more specific but rudimentary forms of gambling in there. That's quite a niche game, but nonetheless, it exists. Usually within these games, like it's not tied down to any sort of progression to sort of get through the games. There is in some instances, like I can think of a mission in Red Dead Redemption 2 where you do sit down and you play poker for a bit. But it's not very common where they're quite core to the storyline or they have quite a heavy emphasis. It's more so like an introduction to this mechanic within the game, and you can revisit that as much as what you'd like to. So it's not to say that games take this sudden turn into being a gambling simulator when this feature is introduced, but nonetheless they are there. So let's move on to the next slide. So what everybody's heard of and what everybody's concerned of is the loot box. So if you don't know what a loot box is, so this usually happens more on the multiplayer gaming space these days. But at the end of a match, or at the end of a series of matches, or if you sort of get enough experience points to unlock one, you'll be presented with a loot box or two or three. And inside of them contain usually cosmetic items. So it might be skins for guns, which means like different camouflages, different paint jobs that you can put on them. Character skins, so different like clothes, outfits, things that you can wear. So just cosmetic things most of the time. Sometimes other games like FIFA are a little different, but they do contain players, for example, that you can use in the team. And then you open them, and then a bunch of things pop out. And the idea is you get more of what you don't want compared to what you do want. And that's the enticement to keep on coming back to it. Again, hoping for a rarer skin or a rarer redress for your avatar. So loot boxes are common because they appear in best-selling video games, and these days best-selling video games are not the ones that you pay for. They are the freemium games out there. So free to download, free to play, but there may be loot boxes within them that you can either unlock with your own progression, or you can buy with real-world money to fund the development of the game and ongoing games after that one. So next slide. So like I said before, so skins are what changes the appearance of the character or the weapon, essentially. So it's a bit of a weird terminology, but that's the way I want you to remember it. Like what's a visual modification to something that you're playing with or engaging with within the game. So skins don't have to stay in the game these days. They can be taken out to third-party websites and converted into real money per se, usually within the cryptocurrency space first, but it can water down or translate down to real world money if you win something. So we'll just go next slide. We'll have a look a little bit about skins betting. So this is a bit of a complex diagram to follow, but look, in essence, so you get the skins within the game, you have them within a wallet or within the inventory of the game. Now you can go onto third-party websites which are not regulated at all, like land-based gambling or online wagering or anything like that. Like they are offshore websites, which means that winnings aren't necessarily guaranteed, which can get people into a lot of trouble. And let's say, for example, that you're betting on an esport, right? So let's say that there's two teams going against each other in Apex Legends, for example, and this is something you can watch. So instead of taking real world money to bet on the outcome, of that match or that tournament or series of matches, people can bet skins, for example. So the rarer the skin, the higher value the item is. And the idea is, okay, well, if you lose it, well, that's your skin gone, and too bad, you're going to have to try and acquire it again. So I suppose creating a sense of increased investment within the game. Or if you win, right, you're probably going to get like a multitude of similar tins with similar skins within that tier, right? And again, like increasing your reinforcement or that want to stay in the game, right? Because you want to earn and win skins of more value, right? And if you're losing, then you want to go back to it and acquire skins of value so you can put it back into the online betting space. So it's getting increasingly, I guess, shut down in Australia. I guess sort of they are getting onto these websites and blocking them from Australian IP addresses, but there's always a new one that can pop up over time. Like it is fighting a difficult battle to regulate these sites. Let's go to the next
Actually,
slide.
Josh, if I just
Yeah.
maybe some of our participants tonight just wrapping their head around this process, the way I'm understanding it is that by playing a game, like through my own sort of experience, I'm then getting a skin and I can do one or two things with it. I can try and barter with it, if I kind of use that word, to try, and get some money off someone else through an unregulated website, or I can take that skin and I can leverage it against a real world event, like an esport tournament, to try and get even more skins. And then either or, I'm actually taking something that didn't have value, I now has value, and I can actually use it within gambling. Am I sort of getting my head around it, and maybe hopefully for our participants too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a barter market for it and trading, that's for sure. And we should mention too, in addition to betting on esports in a commercial gambling sense, but with skins, they can also go onto social gambling game sites that take skins as a form of currency as well. And so the process rinses and repeats.
Okay.
So let's go to the next slide. All right. So I guess compared to other forms of gambling that's out there, if we just look at simulated gambling, right? Of course it is more popular amongst younger people because it is more wider and accessible, right? Because they are sort of gambling with currencies that they can achieve, and that is, for example, skins within game, right? Or other items they have earned per se. And of course, there's no age restrictions because it's simulated. It's not the real thing. So there's no parental controls to circumvent or access that they need to get into or ID to prove, right? And of course, it's very continuous. And of course, because it does emulate real world gambling, right? It can sort of begin to form like a positive impression with gambling within the child or adolescent. Like that can be their original story when it comes to gambling. Mm. Let's move on. So what can we do about this? I guess this can be very alarming from a parent's perspective to know that all of this is out there. So really important to know your child's games and to sit down with them. So I'd recommend for about like an hour a week is something that I would put out there. Just to get a feel for what's going on, getting a sense of the full spectrum of the game, how they play it, what they're doing. If it's multiplayer, what sort of people are they playing with? If it's not their friends, if they're more in like a Discord group, or they are just playing with randoms, or they have formed a community with other people, like who are they talking to? So games can seem very alien and foreign and scary, like if we're not a gamer ourselves, or we've just never gone near that realm of video gaming. We just sort of bought a PS5 for our kid, and we let them play it. But if you let your kid teach you the ropes, they'll also value that. That's a good alliance building exercise as well. That might decrease your concerns with gambling within the game, or it might increase them, right? So either way, it's a good opportunity to know exactly what's going on. And if you can begin to speak that language about what's happening within the game, right? That's how you can communicate back to your child as to what you think is actually happening. That shows that you're in the loop of it as well. Like you're not coming at it as this uninformed parent, if that makes sense. And also having gaming areas in an open area, and preferably away from study arrangements, right? So not having, for example, the PS5 or the Xbox One, or the gaming PC within the same room, per se, that they do their homework in, or somewhere enclosed off. Usually to have gaming in the living room, or in like a study or a desk in the living room. Obviously, it just depends on the setup of the house that you have, but somewhere that you can easily access. I think we got
Oh,
a question in the
there's got a
Q&A.
question actually. Yeah, so Megan was just asking, are there any actions being taken by government to try and regulate simulated gambling in Australia?
And the answer is yes. So they've introduced that into the classification system as of September 2023. So if there's gambling-like features, or simulated gambling, that is going to appear within the classification system, and that'll automatically move it up to R, right? So over 18. So if we're using parental controls within consoles, that's going to make it really easy, right? Because if you block R-rated games, if you block your child from playing R-rated games, within their console, that means that they're not going to come across any gambling-like features, for instance. It'll be a bit more tricky with PC if they're playing on that, but of course there will be a way to catch on to that and to see it clearly in the classification system. Another tip is limiting in-game purchases. So if you think back to when we're a child, the way we think about money is very different to the way we think about it as an adult. If it's not our money and we don't see the money going as a child or an adolescent, we're just going to keep on spending. And in the moment, they may be so caught up in it, and that's also dependent on their prefrontal cortex development. Like if they don't have the ability to regulate yet, they're often just doing now and then not realizing that they're going to deal with the consequences later. So, for example, if they are getting into a habit of buying multiple loot boxes over and over and over again, right? If there's a transaction limit there on their account, that's going to stop that happening. And it's also a good tip for gaming in general, right? So let's say that they're not buying gambling like transactions within games, and they're just buying DLC or other microtransactions. It's good to have a limit there as well, so that you don't get into financial trouble yourself or financial uncomfortability. So like I said before, activating parental controls on devices. So this is pretty easy to do within PlayStation or Xbox. It's just within the settings. With PC, it depends on the platform that they're playing on. The most common one is Steam or Epic Games, for example. There is a way to do it. It's just not as user friendly as PlayStation or Xbox. And like we've said before, having those conversations about the risks associated with gambling and gaming. Putting it first of all in like an open-ended question to say, well, what do you think could go wrong, or what do you think about gambling within games per se, compared to just coming at it like you're reading the riot act to them, just to establish what they think of it and sort of trickle down to guiding them into, I guess, a correct way to perceive it, that isn't misinformed or out of line with the reality of the situation. Yeah. So next slide.
Okay.
It's back to you.
Back to me. So thanks for going through the intricacies of that link. And for everyone watching, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about what Josh just spoke about as you mull over it, please use the Q&A function. And at the end, we'll loop back around to it. So that study that I referenced earlier also looked into the key factors that influence youth's attitudes and behaviors towards gambling. And a number of things came up. So like personal demographics, like age, gender, personality, peers, access. But two of the biggest factors that we'll focus on depth on was firstly gambling and advertising, and then Josh will take over for the attitudes and behaviors of parents and caregivers themselves. So where is gambling being advertised through? Everyone listening here tonight, if they've watched any free-to-air television during that's associated with a sporting event outside of the Olympics or the FIFA World Cup, which, as a side point, their broadcasters have a blanket ban on advertising gambling, have probably seen some form of gambling advertising. So television, it's saturated. Social media, it's saturated. Online ads, so things that just kind of pop up on websites, it's saturated. Gambling websites themselves make sense, but also billboards and more subtly on sponsorship and public relations. You'll see it on many different jerseys. So just like any good advertising, and just speaking from purely marketing principles, you want repetition and you want saturation, and in many different ways. And so gambling is no different, and that's what's happening. And where your children, your boys see gambling advertising might differ to yourselves, but in one way or another, they're being subtly or very overtly exposed to gambling advertising. And importantly, the messages, incorrect, faulty, unhelpful, harmful messages that come with them. So what did you say about how frequently they were exposed? So most young people notice gambling advertising messages or logos through one or more of those media channels at least once every week. That's pretty often. Most of the time, it's during on sports and racing, even though not during sports and racing, and also through social media. And a trend that's coming in society is there's less and less advertising of alcohol, and more advertising of gambling. If you actually, as a parent or as a teacher, sit down and watch the full broadcast of, say, a National Rugby League match from pre-game through during game to after game, you probably might not see a single or maybe one advertisement for an alcohol company, but you might see 2 or 3 different sports betting companies, or maybe the same sports betting company 3 or 4 times. So it's happening frequently. And What is concerning and something to be mindful of when you're trying to have conversation with your boys, to buffer them from harms from gambling, sorry, keep overclicking, is the way that the advertising leverage itself on the vulnerability of our youth. So the advertisements are made in a way that's attractive to young people. In fact, it could be argued it's attractive for adults and serves as attractive for adults, attractive for our youth too. So they use playful language, exciting narratives, colorful designs. So this is, an example that you might find through a digital platform like a PC, a pop-up that comes up. But if you actually cast your mind back to those who may have seen recently gambling advertising, there's all these stories that come with it, that really try and feed into these narratives that gambling is fun, exciting, and importantly, you can do it to win. When the reality is, over time, losing is inevitable. The other thing that's concerning is the fact that the gambling industry exploits not only youth, but our collective poor understanding of math to make money. We as humans, we don't really understand math all too well. The youth don't understand it all too well. The gambling industry does. And so they exploit that through offers and especially misleading offers, complexity, lacking emphasis on the risk to make it seem like a more worthwhile, enjoyable, likely winning event that it is. And so children and youth will be able to start rattling off odds and all those different sort of niche language without having a true understanding of what it actually means. And hence the importance of upskilling yourself as a parent or a teacher or someone else that's connected to St. Pat's, so you can have those conversations in an informative way. There are other impacts of this gambling advertising. As I just said, it kind of puts the idea of odds into youth's heads well before they truly understand the mathematical aspect of it and the inherent unfairness over time of any form of gambling, especially sports and race betting. But it unfortunately begins to normalize it as part of sports, which I think is a real shame. We're taking something as pure as just the competitiveness of a sporting event, and it's becoming just intertwined with gambling, trying to make money, and then fun and enjoyment shifts to a really harmful space. It also can give this positive impression towards gambling before youth turn into adults and start giving access gambling in its regulated forms as ever they want. So it's sort of seeding in some beliefs that when replicated in the real world, it can put them in harmful situations. And from a clinical point of view, early positive experiences are fundamental to people experiencing gambling harm presenting to treatment years later. If people have an early positive experience with gambling, whether they're 7, 10, 14, 18, sometimes 60, they start to have these beliefs in their mind that just don't align with the unfairness of the game that they're interacting with. And that just really puts them in a vulnerable position to developing harmful behavior later on. So this gambling advertising really leverages on that. It tries to sort of put an early positive experience in our youth, and as parents and teachers, we try and buffer them against that by giving them the full and complete picture. Another issue with so much gambling advertising is it inadvertently tells the youth, you can do it yourself. Even though you're not legally allowed to yet, you can do it, you can find a way. And if you do it well, then you might be positively evaluated by your peer group. So what to do? A couple of overlaps with what Josh said. So using online parental controls, whether that be blocks on the phone from downloading certain betting applications, adjusting online security settings, so certain websites can't be accessed, sort of being on the lookout to kind of seeing what your boys are engaging with, what they're talking about, But the main thing really we encourage is to start that conversation. All the statistics are showing that it's common amongst particularly male youth, that if they're not gambling themselves in some capacity, someone they know probably is, that might be even speaking about it. So curiously, ask them what they think, ask them what they know, grab opportunities as they come up. Maybe you're driving to the sport game on a Saturday morning, and it's referenced in the commentary of the radio that you're listening to. Maybe an ad pops up on TV during a halftime while watching a match. Or maybe you might notice now there's a loot box in the game they're playing, or a skin that they've earned, and use that opportunity to ask them what they think, what they know, what they've experienced, and really cover the important topics. Cover the topic that the odds, and if you don't want to use that terminology because it still might be complex for your child, but that the people that are offering this product, it's only in their favor. It's only designed for them to be up in the end. They, over time, as a person engaging with it, are just going to end up being harmed. And also just really start to reverse that unfortunate association between competitive sport and betting and odds. That sport can be fun and exciting through the purity of it. It doesn't have to be leveraged against making money. And it might also be useful just to ask some really specific questions like, well, do you actually know what the odds are of winning the lottery? Do you actually know what the odds are of winning if you go on a poker machine? Do you actually know how this loot box works? As a great conversation starter to explore it yourself, explore it with your boy, or ask them to explore them themselves. There's just something in the chat I just want to... Yeah, so Robert's sort of spoken about how there's this effectively that they're trying to leverage off the way our brain works. And yeah, the way our brain works is we want to achieve good things. We want to be up in our lives, and they're trying to give those messages that really align with that. They certainly don't align with the risks. So heading back over to Josh.
Yep. Okay, let's flick on. There we go. So I guess just a little look at, how a parent's life or the way that we conduct ourselves can influence our child. So this is taken from the youth gambling study as well. So if parents have a belief or they have a worldview that gambling is harmless fun, of course, that's going to predict further gambling problems in adulthood. So it's really having some self-reflection or taking an audit of your own approach to gambling. So do you gamble yourself? How often, how much? How does that trickle down to the kids in terms of like what they witness or how that impacts it, right? Or extended, family, or family friends, right? And gambling might be a big part of their life, and how are they interacting with that family member, per se. So even if I guess you grew up and let's say that it was very normal to go to the Golden Slipper, all the time, like you would turn up religiously, right? If that's a big thing, within your family to do that, it's to think, well, what might that be instilling in my child, right? Even if it's only, a few days a year, but we're really big fans of it, what's that communicating down to them? So it is really seeing gambling for what it is and having that self-awareness for, okay, if I am engaged with gambling, how's this going to be passed down to my child? What is the origin of this per se? Because parental influence is huge in terms of gambling. So also, I guess, avoiding any conversations about gambling. So on the other end of the spectrum, so pretending that it doesn't exist, or stigmatizing it a lot, or having, no rules about gambling, like especially once they get into their later adolescence, where that might be more of a thing around it, or rules with simulated gambling within games that they're playing. So if it's just too lax, where they can sort of, I guess, get into the world of gambling on their own in a very I guess, sort of unrestricted, unfiltered way. Of course, it's going to predict, gambling harm in the future. And of course, if it's just this thing that's hidden away, tucked about, never discussed, and then when they start to, I guess, get introduced to gambling through school, right? There's been no opportunity to have conversations to correct their beliefs and their attitudes towards gambling, so that something doesn't take over within that sense. So this might seem like an obvious one, but like approving or facilitating gambling. So that might be giving access to, your gambling account, like handing over your phone so they can put on a bet, right? Or getting them to choose lotto numbers is another example. Or let's say that, you're betting on something and then you ask for your kids' bet as well to say, "Oh, okay, well, what do you think? Or like, do you want to put anything on, whilst I'm doing this?" Or going to the races, for instance, right? And then, putting on bets for them and actively asking, what they want to do. So all these things which may seem, innocent and fun, and it may just think that, oh, well, I'm just trying to, include them in a family activity, right? It's to think, okay, well, what could that be doing in terms of predicting their likelihood to gamble when they're later adolescent and adult. Yeah, and of course, if we're having a gambling problem or issue ourselves, right, that might be a bit of a signal to finally call up and book in to get some gambling counseling, right? It might be the push that we need to move towards that step of doing something about gambling ourselves, if we're in that sort of space where we are gambling more than what we can afford, right? And obviously that's setting a really good role model for your kids, right? If that is an issue that afflicts you and you're doing something about it, that's going to instill good messages and values in them to do the same for them if that were to happen. So next slide. Yeah. So also just staying informed about gambling trends and risks for young people. So by attending this webinar, you've already done that. So congratulations. So keep up with those sort of activities on weeknights. So again, not being afraid to have conversations about adult materials, and gambling is one of them, right? Just sort of, bringing it into that like you would with another adult or peer, right? To help them see gambling in the correct way. So to not encourage gambling, or to not place bets for them, or to not give them access to online accounts, of course. If you are gambling yourself, always role modeling, safe and responsible gambling. So responsible gambling is quite a loaded term and it confuses and triggers people. But to be honest, it's gambling within the means, right? So I'm not spending more than what I can afford. It's not causing problems within life or depriving me of opportunities, like not being able to pay for holidays or taking payday loans, things like that, for instance. And if there's any misconceptions about gambling, like, oh, it's a way to win, lots of money, or like it's a bit of a side hustle, or like my friend, Joey at school, said that he does X, Y, and Z, and I'm thinking about getting into that as well, or just glorifying gambling in any other way, not being afraid to steer that ship around when the opportunity comes up. So next slide. Yeah. So educating about risk, consequences, allowing them to come to their own conclusions with appropriate and well-rounded evidence is the best way to go about it, rather than just straight out banning it and say, well, don't you ever touch that or you'll be in lots of trouble, right? Because again, like you're encouraging like a bit of rebellion and naughtiness by doing that. The key message is really is to say that, look, gambling is a business, right? So whether it's, a game provider selling pokies, or it's bookies, setting up shops and, taking bets based on racing and sporting events, right? They create those things to make money in the long term, right? And it's to think that if we could make gambling, if we could win money in the long term from gambling, how on earth would that exist, right? So it's to say that if a restaurant opened up, right, and they gave out free food 2/3 of the time, how would they stay in business? Like businesses there to take money from their consumers and player base. Also to sort of iterate and separate that we can watch sports without betting on the game, despite all the gambling advertising that is out there to encourage us to do that within the game. And of course, you know how it's tied together in Australian culture. We don't have to. There's nothing wrong with just watching the NRL and not having any skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of like money that you've put into it. And you know, if we are going to gamble, again, modeling, you know, setting deposit limits or setting spending limits, right? To say that I'm showing you that this is only going to go so far. Like, yes, I can theoretically bet for a long time, but I'm choosing not to. I have a limit, and this is what I'm going to model to my kids. All right, next slide. So just in terms of some flags to look out for. So like I said before, positive attitudes around gambling, which might manifest as talking about what other kids are doing at school, or talking about, you know, certain Twitch streamers that they're watching that might be gambling Twitch streamers. More not so much of a thing as it used to. Twitch has heavily cracked down on gambling streams, so it's not as huge as it was a couple of years ago. But essentially having these idols and these role models either on the internet or their friends or with, you know, certain internet celebrities, right, that they're following, that's glorifying gambling, and they're so excited about it, it's leaking through to your attention, like you're becoming aware of it. So I guess at the expense of other activities that they used to be into, or activities that they should be doing, you know, if they're just increasingly preoccupied with games and internet gambling and sports results or sports statistics, or, you know, you see them a lot on Sports Radar, for instance, that might be a sign that they're having an increasing focus on gambling. Asking for money, right? Especially if it's more frequent or more big, so above what they usually do. And again, if they're withdrawing from, you know, social supports and activities, right? So that they're not hanging out with the same people that they used to, or they're not wanting to go to soccer training or taekwondo training anymore, right? And just sort of like sit on their computer or sit on their iPad or their phone. If you're getting notified from schools that they're having unexplained absences, or that comes in the school report, right? And there's a bunch of them that you weren't aware of, the question would be, okay, well, what are they up to? I mean, that could be a multitude of things, but it could point towards a rising gambling issue. Also, if there's like altercations in their mood, right? Or they're constantly stressed, on edge, they get frustrated when somebody gets in the way of something that they're trying to do, or they just seem really low or generally worried, and you can't pin it down to anything that's happening in their life. That might be a sign that gambling might be rising. And of course, you know, if they're beginning to lie, cheat, and steal in school. So I guess this is something we see with our clients, but when we're in the heavy stage of gambling, like, it is characterized by a lot of lying and deception and deceit. It's not to say that that's necessarily the trait of the person, but rather once somebody gets into a bit of trouble or strife with their gambling, they're often so worried about people finding out, not supporting them, you know, getting into more financial trouble if, let's say, they're kicked out of the house, or the financial autonomy is taken away from them, that they'll try to do everything that they can to conceal it, with good intentions, not with bad intentions per se. So that might be another sign as well. And next one. And just some support services to look out for. So us, GambleAware, here we are. So we got lots of locations around Sydney. And we've got a website that you can go to as well to learn more about gambling in young people as well. Kids Helpline is a great resource, especially for particularly a crisis situation where there might be some, I guess, sort of on the go phone counseling needed for children. Headspace is great. So they do bulk billing, and they do early intervention mental health care services up to 25. So giving them a call is a good idea if you're concerned about, I guess, your adolescent gambling. And of course, if you're looking for online safety programs and just general more logistical things, the e-Safety Commission is a good resource as well. And next one. And we're at the questions. So I'd encourage you to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for going through those last few sections and specifically the convergence from gambling and gaming before. So for those who are part of this webinar, encourage any questions, comments, general feedback in the Q&A function. Ideally, chat is also an option too. I guess while we allow time for people to absorb that information and maybe put in through their questions, there's a few things I just wanted to comment on those last things, Josh, that when you're having that conversation, it's just so important to just highlight that this thing, gambling, it can only exist if there's a money-making aspect of it to the person providing it. If everyone was winning, or if lots of people were winning, this thing wouldn't exist. It would fold, just like your analogy. A restaurant giving out free food to every two-thirds of customers that walk in. It's just not going to be sustainable. So it's really highlighting that, while the outcome is uncertain, like right now, over time, there's only one certain outcome, and that's you're going to lose. And that when they're offering odds, on TV or radio or other digital advertising, print media, the only person that's benefiting from those odds overall is the bookie, for example. So, okay, got a few questions coming through. Josh, you might be able to speak more to that first one from Irene about parental controls.
Irene, is your child playing, what platform are they playing on? As in, is it PlayStation? Is it Xbox? Is it computer? Or do you know the platform? Because that matters.
It's
okay. So I'm assuming it's on PC. Okay. So yeah. PC. So that would be, Fortnite is launched through Epic Games. So that's where they would be playing it, unless they pirated the game. But I don't know why when it would be free to play. But it would be getting into the settings of Epic Games to enable the controls there. So there is a specific launcher, like you can look within your kid's PC. It's not as easy as consoles. But it will be in there if we go looking into the setting as to certain classification ratings that we can put on there, and content and that sort of stuff. So Epic Games store or launcher is what you're looking for in their computer.
Yeah, I also encourage the e-Safety Commissioner is a good place to start. They've got decision trees and stuff that you can go through that start guide you towards the resources that you're looking for. Rachel's made a great comment, Josh, I think worthwhile discussing. If a young person gambles and has stolen and lost a lot of money, does that mean they have a gambling addiction and can never be a healthy, safe, and responsible gambler as an adult? Or could a bad experience when young actually serve to prevent adult gambling addiction, as they've seen the downside? It's a really astute comment, actually, Rachel, that early positive experiences are predictive of later gambling harm and treatment engagement. Early negative experiences are also predictive of no or limited relationship with gambling. Someone's just not inclined or desired to. Certainly, the way that we work is that no one is born with any preconceptions about gambling. No one's born with any single marker that's going to indicate that they are going to experience gambling harm. For all intents and purposes, it's a learned behavior. It's a set of beliefs that develop over time, hence the importance of having those conversations about monitoring our own beliefs as teachers and parents. And so those beliefs can be reversed. They can be addressed and healthier beliefs can be developed that then lead to actions that take us away from harm. But certainly, yeah, we're certainly going to have times when someone has an early negative experience with gambling. They might lose something that was of value, like to go back to what Josh said. They might have worked for a long, long time in a game to get a particular skin for a character. They then decide to wager it on an esport. That wager lose, and they go, well, crap, like that was a lot of effort. Maybe it's not worthwhile anymore. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Josh, in your own clinical experience?
Yeah, just in a minute. I just dropped in the chat a guide to how to get into the parental controls of the Epic Games launcher for Irene, so you can just follow that to enable that. But yeah, just to add to that, I suppose even I guess clinically having a gambling problem when you're a child or adolescent, yeah, can serve as a, well, like that was a really bad time for me. I don't want to go back there. So it's not necessarily going to predict with 100% accuracy that they're going to be an unhealthy gambler when they're older. So there is another side to it. There is a duality to those experiences that we need to see. And often when somebody presents, as an adult for gambling counseling, it is realistic, according to the individual, to work towards a goal of recreational gambling, right? Because if we start gambling, we get into gambling, there's always going to be a recreational, non-harmful stage, right? So if we're to work towards that, if that's what the client wants and that's what's realistic for them as well, and it's achievable, then we can work down to that as well. So yes, like a problem early on isn't necessarily an incredibly poor prognosis for the gambling forever. Yeah.
No, thanks for a really insightful comment. So, any? Oh, yep. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Any? Encourage anyone else still here. Questions, comments, feedbacks. From any part of tonight's webinar. Just the trends that the study demonstrated in the data, the impact of advertising, the role of parents, gaming. Still just allow maybe another minute or two to just observe if we have anyone else who has further questions or comments. Otherwise, it's worth just highlighting that you'll be able to rewatch this at a later stage through the recording. There'll probably be some correspondence from St. Pat's to where you can access it to it. We'll be uploading it to our YouTube page. And there you actually find a wide range of webinars about various topics to do with gambling, if you're so inclined interested.
Be part of that process of keeping up with gambling trends.
Yes.
Mm.
And just to come back to the section that I did, gambling and advertising, is that the trend away from alcohol towards gambling, the different messages that our youth are now getting from seeing so much saturation, using those advertising as an opportunity to start an open and curious discussion. Really trying to sort of provide psychoeducation, beginning to clarify some of maybe the faulty beliefs that are simmering the surface from what they might have heard from their peer group or even experienced themselves. And if you're sort of with the Olympics coming up, in the next couple of months, for those who do watch sport regularly, I encourage you just to notice what's it like to watch sport without gambling advertising. I know that it was a breath of fresh air watching the Matildas at the Women's FIFA World Cup last year. Just before, during, after games, you weren't bombarded with the advertising. You were just sort of celebrating the women's sport, which was great. Josh, would you like to speak to Rachel's question?
Yeah, Yeah, I love that term, cross-pollinate. That's a really lovely way to put a horrible thing that can happen. I mean, there's always research out there talking about comorbidities between substance-based problems and behavioral-based problems, per se. So there's a realm where you can there's a way to find what you're looking for, like affirm a type of confirmation bias by looking at correlations. More realistically, I like to think of it as, if they get involved in one activity, is that going to put them into a crowd that's going to introduce them into something else, per se, like a stepping stone, so to speak. So let's say, for example, that somebody is buying lots of loot boxes on FIFA, right? And that's just their thing. They're just really into FIFA. So they might play it on multiplayer, might be with friends, might just be with randoms on the internet. But like it's a very sort of self-contained experience. Then probably not. But let's say, for example, that, I don't know, you've got you got a boy who's in year 8, and they're hanging out with year 12s or year 11s, that are putting on bets, and then they start getting invited to house parties and going along for that. That might be more of like a cross-pollination example. So not necessarily, and it really is to think that, okay, from their gambling experience, what crowds or what communities are they getting introduced to, and what are they doing as well? What sort of people are they like? So I'd think about it like that.
Yeah, I'd concur with you, Josh. But
Mm.
again, it's a great conversation starter, because I'm sure they're real legitimate concerns your parents have. Um, and I echo the kind words that Robert's put, where he was sort of saying that, the more we can educate our young men, the more we can have them sort of be responsible, informed adults when they graduate. They're going out into the real world, and these are real world challenges that they have to navigate. And as parents and teachers, we can give them the tools and skills to better understand potentially harmful situations, of which gambling is certainly one, and a growing one amongst our youth. Okay. Well, we might start looking to wrap things up. If we do get a final question, we'll jump onto it. But thanks for everyone that's participated tonight. When we do leave the webinar, you might find that there's going to be a little just a survey that pops up. It'd be much appreciated if you could spend 45 seconds just to fill it out. It helps us inform our future webinars and community engagement endeavors. And so how we individually also can improve on how we impart this really important content. So I really thank you for your participation, for listening, for spending time on a weeknight. And if you do know of other parents who were interested about this and weren't able to weren't available tonight, you're more than welcome to tell them that it will be uploaded later on. But I also believe that the school will also pick some correspondence out too. So thank you very much to everyone, and have a great evening.
Yeah, see you later. Thank you.